David Brooks, New York Times columnist, urges readers to reflect on whether they are illuminators or diminishers in their interactions with others. He explains that diminishers often judge and label people without truly understanding them, while illuminators possess a deep curiosity and skill in seeing things from another's perspective. Illuminators ask insightful questions and make others feel valued and understood. Brooks writes, they shine the brightness of their care on people and make them feel bigger, respected, and lit up. As Christians, we have an amazing opportunity to transform lives with the light of Jesus, revealing God's endless love and care for others. And we can dive into this mission with passion, just as Jesus did, breaking through barriers and connecting with people right where they are, not to condemn them, but to save them, as Jesus says in John 3:17. I'm so glad you joined us for today's show, because we're going to learn how one ministry is training youth and young adults to gain the skill of illuminating the lives around them with the light of Jesus. You're watching One Day Closer, where we're learning together how to use our one day closer to eternity to bring hope and purpose to many. Let's go meet our guest for today. We're here today with Bill Harrison from Touch the World Ministries. Bill, so you have the privilege of being my second return guest. So it's so great to have you on the show. And our viewers can check out the other ministry from Touch the World we talked about last time, and also get to know you a little better through that interview as well. But thanks so much for being on again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as we start, just give us a little refresher on what Touch the World Ministries is.
So Touch the World is a mission training organization that emphasizes the importance of training before anyone goes on a serving opportunity, whether it's domestic or international. And what we do and want to do is to see the next generation live a life on mission every day, everywhere.
Yeah. Your t-shirt, I love your mission. It rings in my head. Everyone, every day, everywhere.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's awesome. What are some of the programs that you offer for Touch the World for training?
So we have a couple of different things. We have an online platform where all of our training is cataloged in one location for churches and individuals called the Mission Academy. We have an annual conference for teens, and we have one coming up in March 2025 called the Rise Conference.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we also have our 3-day training, which I'm here to talk about, the training before students go on a trip. And then we also have our young adult programs where we have a summer internship, and then we also have a gap year program, which is what I talked about last time I was here.
Yeah, awesome. So many exciting things that you have, and equipping that I think certain people aren't aware of is available.
Yeah.
And I've been a part of training youth for missions trips, and I can say I was part of the training, and I will certainly not do it as well as you guys do. So I think what you offer is incredible. So tell me a little bit about the summer mission training, this 3-day training.
Yeah, so it's essential training in which groups will come for 3 days and they'll learn God's story, their story, or my story as we call it, the complexities of poverty and the dynamics of culture. And so that when they come through this training, they have the foundation of what it's like to live on mission. So when they go to the field, they're not learning it as they're there. They've already gotten that foundation, so then they can express it out to serve the host, serve their communities. So that way when they come back, they can see what that looks like in their own life.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. The equipping so that when they're there, they're living out what they've already learned instead of trying to learn it. And then it's a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of planning to get onto a mission trip, to get there. So to have that preparation ahead of time is so great. I appreciate that you call it essential training. Explain to me why it's essential and what you mean by that.
We all have an understanding of the importance of God's mission and mission trips and short-term trips and our roles that we want to have in there. But a lot of times our good intentions can get in the way of God's movement. And so being able to have a reset of our hearts and minds before we go, so then we know why we're there, how we're going there, and the mind frame of the purpose that God has called us all to do, then we end up actually being able to serve in a more healthy platform for the host and their communities, but also be able to use it as a discipleship opportunity for these leaders taking these teens to continue that discipleship on their return, to be able to pull back moments of the training while they're there and pull back the moments of their trip when they get back home, and how they can engage with their own communities.
So it's not just an experience. It's a training that is designed, and then when they're on the trips, to be transformational and things they can bring back with them, right? That's so great. And I remember something really stuck out to me when I interviewed a man who was a missionary, and then he worked on overseeing missionaries for Liebenzel, and now he's a pastor. And one of the things he stuck out, even just something small, was the reality of how much work it can be for a missionary to host. And so even, I'm sure you touch on some of that, just recognizing what are we here to do, and how can we come alongside and empower versus drain the missionaries that are already there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even in speaking into that as well, and knowing that missionaries wear a lot of hats, and having the opportunity to take these teams and introduce them to their communities, we as a short-term team have that burden that however we leave those relationships, the host has to facilitate, whether it's good or bad. And so how we love their community is how that host can then see some of that fruit in the long term.
That's fantastic. Well, good. We're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk more about this. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. We're going to come back and dive deeper into what summer missions training is.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information.
Welcome back to One Day Closer. We're here with Bill Harrison talking about summer mission training with Touch the World. So Bill, we just kind of got a synopsis of what Touch the World does and the importance of this mission training that you provide for these 3-day trainings. And let's break down a little bit. You gave an outline of what the students learn while they're there. You said God's story, my story, the complexities of poverty, and the dynamics of culture. Yes, okay. Start with God's story. Tell me about what are you training them to do in the midst of that?
So we teach them the arc of the Bible, essentially, the overarching story that God has placed out there, where we have creation, and we associate that with our identities, that we were all created in the image of God. And then you have brokenness, or the fall, and how that was broken, and a lot of the relationships were severed between our relationship with God, ourself, others, and creation. And then we have rescue, or redemption and salvation, where we are brought back into that foundation with God. And from there, we are on mission, and that is being sent to go out and preach that good news, where we look at the end of the story where it's shalom, or the restoration of where our relationship and our standing with God has been fully restored in the end.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember in seminary, I started seminary shortly after becoming a believer. And so I remember the first time I was exposed to the overarching theme of the scriptures, which is awesome. But I can say in my time in seminary, my time as a pastor, in my time now, very rarely do we include the mission component, right? So of course we recognize it's there, that we're part of that rescue mission, but I think it's really powerful that you emphasize that. And why do you think it's so commonly missing when we talk about
it? Is interesting, because in a lot of ways when we talk about salvation, we talk about you're broken and now you're restored. Great, you're good. But there is no movement on that. There's no action to that. And when we understand God's story, then we get to understand our role and our part of that story. And if you look in the Bible, you can see God calls every single person and he sends them, whether here, near, or far, to preach his word, to preach whatever news he is being told, that they are being told to go preach. And so when we take that concept of, okay, we were broken and now we're restored and then nothing else, it is the action that we've now been given, that God is a ascending God, and that his mission, or the Missio Dei, is that we are then called to be his ambassadors, again, here, near, or far, to preach that same good news so others can also be brought into that as well. And so if we are built in the identity of God, And if God's a sending God, then our identities are also to be sent ones with that word.
Yeah. Wow. I think, and I was just reading last night in a book, they were talking about a study that showed only 25% of believers, I think in our country, had identified that they were trained to evangelize, and only 5% had actually ever done it.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's 5 out of 100 people only who shared the gospel. Tell me how, as you kind of got into this, but how does my story then, you're going from God's story into my, like I'm part of reflecting God in this world. What do you emphasize there?
So when we have our students, we teach them the concept of kairos moments. These are moments in our lives that are impactful, that create a life change. And we break it down with engage, reflect, and act. You engage this situation, you reflect on how it's affected you, and then you act. You put movement to that, so that way there's life change. And when you have these moments that God is bringing you through your life, we have that opportunity to engage with what he's doing in our life. And when we identify these kairos moments, it allows us to be able to communicate our story. Because when you understand how to put words to these moments, it makes having conversations of what God's done in your life. Those testimonies don't always have to be, well, I was 6 years old and I got baptized, and this is how God's affected everything. But it makes it living of last week I had this situation that God has moved and stretched me. And your testimony becomes a living testimony of how he's constantly moving in our lives every day.
That's fantastic. And if our viewers don't maybe know, kairos is from Greek, right? So meaning this idea of a moment. And that's part of the equipping that I love, that you're shaping a mindset. You're not just giving them practical skills on necessarily how to interact, though some of that is definitely there, but you're trying to shape their mindset and heart for living on mission every day, everywhere. And then on the mission trip, it's also an opportunity for them to serve, but also equipping them to then come home and do that. That's fantastic. So we go from God's story to my story, then we move into the complexities of poverty. Talk about that.
So we talk about how poverty is brokenness. That is not just economical, it's multifaceted. And so we live in a broken world, and we all have brokenness in our lives. And when we start to shape this understanding and teach them how to empathize in that brokenness and be able to see the heart to that, it becomes a lot more of a conversation of empathy rather than judgment, or even having our own Western mindset of, if you have this one solution, then this one answer will happen. It teaches that there's so much more to it, and that we even find that even in ourselves, we may be broken and impoverished in some forms. And so it makes a much more of a dynamic that they can engage with people, not just those in economic poverty, but those that are in relational poverty or spiritual poverty. And pray in and speak life into those moments that God can move.
At least from my perspective, oftentimes, so poverty in our culture is primarily financial, right? That's what we focus on. And then everybody's fighting to give their overly simplistic solution. It's just more education, or it's just more provision, or more whatever. But really, the brokenness is central. There's poverty in our souls, right? And just it leaks out into all different areas, and only Christ can fill that. So then you move from complexities of poverty into dynamics of culture. Tell me about that.
So one of the things that we like to teach our students is that it's not wrong, it's just different. Now, obviously, there's a lot of caveats in that when it comes to the biblical understanding that we look at. But for the overall, it's not wrong, it's just different. It takes the mindset of having this is the correct opinion, to being more of a learner, to understanding, well, why do you do it this way? And why do I do it my way? You start to understand your own biases and your own preferences when it comes to certain cultural dynamics. I know we've talked a little bit about how people eat pizza. And if you go to the Midwest, it's square and cut in squares and it's flat. And on a Northeastern, you're like, that's definitely wrong. Why would you do that? But it allows you to have a more of an understanding of, well, maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's different ways. Maybe I'm doing things differently or wrong.
You are, because I'm from the Midwest. And the square gives you more pizza. That's what I'm saying, but I don't know.
More to share.
More to share, or more to eat.
That's true too.
That's how I feel. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And this idea of like you said, there are clear rights and wrongs in Scripture, but I love that we have a God who didn't just shout from heaven everything that is wrong with us, because that wouldn't have fixed anything, right?
Yeah.
But he came down and met us where we're at, and there's plenty of interactions. Christ, he was called the friend of tax collectors and sinners. He was called a glutton and a drunkard, and because he was so in the worlds of these people. And he came, I love in John 3:17, not to condemn, but to save, right? And it doesn't mean he didn't clearly say the truth, but he was willing to meet people where they were at, and that's so powerful. Wow, that's awesome. And I love what, I learned something in my early 20s that I'm still trying to do well, but I said, you don't have to agree with somebody, but you don't have to openly disagree with them either, right? Yeah. So you're teaching people to stop, think, and also not have kind of an arrogant attitude, right? So tell me a little bit about just that idea, how we often view other cultures as less than ours.
In a lot of ways, because we come in with a mindset that we are accustomed to, that this is the way things should be and how they should look, that when you're engaging with someone that is doing things differently than you, you lose the inability to learn from them to how to maybe even improve your way of life. But the reality is that we may go and have, especially if we go on a mission trip, we may go and try to innovate or offer suggestions when we don't actually know. Because in a lot of ways, we're guests into these people's homes. And that even goes on a macro scale of being in a different country, and on a micro scale of even just your neighbor. You don't know their upbringing. Just as much as you have your own upbringing, there might be differences. And so having the humbled heart to be able to say, well, how did you develop that? What made you learn to do it this way? And you may, again, find you have your own personal biases that are just different, and that's okay.
And tell me about I love the $2 day. So you do a simulation that helps students really dive into this. What's the $2 day?
So when we're teaching about poverty and the dynamics of poverty, we emphasize the simulation that have situations many in the majority world engage with. And when we talk about the majority world, we talk about how more than 50% of the world lives on less than $5 a day, and 10% of that live on less than $2 a day, which is twice as much as the United States population. And so when we put these students with these westernized mindsets or these majority world mindsets into minority world problems, they get confronted with impossible decisions that they themselves never thought they would have to make decisions that they have to do. And it's set up where each group has a family which have a wage and resource, they have a role in the community, and they have a family that they have to feed and take care of. And as they go through this training that we have, they'll be prompted with situations and scenarios that many in the majority world face and have to, again, be confronted with these difficult choices. So as they go through it, they end up developing a sense of empathy rather than judgment, to be able to want to hear the story of why, again, this family may be making certain decisions the way that they are, rather than saying, how could you send your child to go collect recyclables in the junkyard? That's so dangerous. Why don't you send them to school? And it's like, well, that's allowing them to gain an additional couple cents in order to feed that child. That otherwise would be like they can go to school, but they're going to be starving, which is a whole other issue that they would have to face. So really they just learn that dynamic of wanting to understand what decisions and choices are leading up to the difficulties that people live in every day.
That's fantastic. In many cultures in the world are collectivistic and community-oriented, right? We're not. And so I like to win. Our culture is competitive. Do you ever see that come about? As
Absolutely. We always have a student or even leader that goes and they're like, we're going to beat this. We're going to beat poverty in a sense. We're going to beat how to do this. So they come in with their majority world mindset and they end up finding that they end up doing more harm to themselves and their community. They start to realize as they go along that trying to make money or trying to just do the right decision all the time, they start realizing that we in our own society have a lot of leeway to make those decisions because of the buffers that we have in our own systems. However, many don't. And so when they try to make these decisions with the majority world mindset, they start isolating themselves and isolating others, and they start actually hurting more of their families and other families.
in the communities, and you see decisions they haven't had to make, right? There's very few of those type of decisions we have to make in our country because of all the abundance. Tell me, any stories stick out about churches or groups that have been through this that, have really kind of been transformed in their perspective?
Yeah, so I have two that come to mind. One of them is a church that we've had that they were interested in training, but they weren't sure if they wanted to make it mandatory for all their students because it's an additional 3 days on top of the trip itself. And so less than half of their students came to training, and they had such an amazing experience that the leader by the end was kind of like head in his hands of like, how am I going to take this training and teach the rest of the students on the field in hopes that they get it? So he was grateful that these students got it because at least he had a core to sort of like build off of. But he was like, man, I need to make this more mandatory. And then I have other just countless stories just overall of churches that have come year after year, students that have come since they were in middle school, that go through each training, that have gone through our 1.0 courses to our 2.0 courses, that have then become leaders and gone through our leader courses to pour into their next generation. And just seeing the growth and how they talk about God's mission, how they talk about their families and their workplace and their schools and their communities, and want to engage with what mission looks like in their everyday with how they connect in their community and those around them.
That's awesome. And one thing I really appreciate is it's very affordable. When you told me what it costs, that's fantastic. And just as we close, so people can go to Touch the World Ministries.
It's just touchtheworld.org.
Touch the World, sorry. I keep saying ministries on the end. Touchtheworld.org.
Touchtheworld.org.
Yeah, that's fantastic to learn more. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We're going to come back and talk about how we can begin applying this to our lives.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information.
Listen to the captivating picture we get of John the Baptist and his role in presenting Jesus to others in Luke chapter 1. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people in the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. I love the image of Jesus as the sunrise, casting light into the darkness. As his followers, we have an amazing opportunity to mirror that light and life to others. By genuinely connecting with, understanding, and caring for others, we offer them vibrant glimpses of Jesus' love. As a new day dawns tomorrow, how will you begin to craft a narrative of illumination in the lives of those you encounter, bringing them one day closer to an eternity with Jesus? Here are some steps that you can take today so that you can begin lighting up the lives and locations around you tomorrow. First, right after this program ends, ask God for the humility you need to see others through his eyes. Second, write down the name of someone in your life who needs Jesus, but is different from you ethnically, culturally, socially, or otherwise. Third, list 3 questions that you can ask them to help you better understand their perspective on life. You can ask them what their family background is. You can ask them, what are the things that you value most in your life and in this world? You can ask them, what gets you most excited in life, or what's frustrating you the most right now? Fourth, pray for opportunities to connect with them and start crossing the hallway or the street or the city to meet them where they're at, and then watch God work through you in their life. Thank you so much for joining us for One Day Closer, where we're learning together how to use our one day closer to eternity to bring Jesus-infused hope and purpose to many.